I was adopted, I was 15 days old. And it was very common to adopt really young babies in Sri Lanka. No one has ever really asked why it was possible and how it happened that in Sri Lanka we had this possibility. I was always aware of my adoption. I never questioned my parents about being black while they were white. My sister and I even laughed about it when she was young, as she thought every family had a black child. I have always been very comfortable with my adoption story. My adoptive parents supposedly met my biological mother at the time of the adoption, but later we will realize that it was not really my mother they met. My mother frequently mentions a woman named Mrs. Pereira. This woman facilitates adoption from Sri Lanka to France, effectively controlling the adoption scene in the country. In the 1980s, during the start of the Civil War, my family was too poor to raise me, and they couldn't raise me because it was the beginning of the war and I was put up for adoption, and in the end it was a chance compared to my maybe brothers and sisters who stayed in Sri Lanka and had lived through 30 years of civil war. Over the years, I realized that my life could have been really different in Sri Lanka, that my destiny was altered. As I grow up, I don't feel close to Sri Lanka at all. More, I identify much more with my grandfather or my mother or my cousins. I am almost in denial of Sri Lanka. Belonging or resemblance, I will understand much later that this is what I missed. So it's in the month of May 2019. There are many people who tell me, look, there is a report called The Stolen Children of Sri Lanka that airs Thursday night on Special Report. And I don't feel at all concerned with that. So my first response is I might watch, but it's not my priority this Thursday night. I have other priorities. Even my mother reassures me, saying, we have no doubt about your adoption. We went through legal channels without paying cash. All the reassuring things I know about my story. In the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep. I watch, and then I discover the first part of the report where the journalist explains in the first 10 minutes what is going to happen, the two people he followed, the search for origin in Sri Lanka, that there are judges who are involved, that there are French politicians. I'm amazed as I realize these are girls who were adopted in 1982, 1983, and 1984. I say to myself, damn, but these are still my years and all that. Anyway, it's weird. And at the 10th minute of the report, the journalist says, we were still lucky then for a journalistic fact to be able to meet one of the main heads of this international child trafficking network called Madame Pereira. Everything collapses. Since a quarter of an hour before, I was not concerned with this report. I go in reverse and I say, Madame Pereira, it's not possible. And so, Madame Pereira, it's thanks to her that my parents had me. And there, in the space of 10 minutes, I find myself plunged into it all alone in my living room, saying to myself, but wow, what is this? So I think I start crying right away. This report is really well done. There are a lot of photos, since the girls who were followed gave photos of their family, which were taken in Sri Lanka at the time of their adoption. In fact, I almost feel like I'm seeing my parents in these photos and hearing my parents' story that they were picked up at the airport, that they were taken to a boarding house. Then in the report, they say that the boarding house where our parents are staying belongs to the Pereira family. The babies are presented in the hotel room and of the boarding house, and then there is a pseudo photo that is taken with a mother actress or a real mother, since there are some who have their real mother in the photo. And others are actress mothers like me. In fact, I learned everything during the report, since the girls who were followed and the journalists did an extraordinary job, since they even went to get the diplomatic mail from the time of the French ambassador who was in Sri Lanka, who denounces an international child trafficking and that we need to stop validating the passports. We let this happen with full knowledge of the facts. What I learned about this child trafficking is that there are several methods. There is the baby farm method for children who are in the countryside and far from cities. These children are taken from their family by I don't know what method, a money exchange, but very low, or outright torn from their mother or taken directly from the maternity ward. These children are stored in buildings called baby farms until they are put up for adoption. These are children who are often malnourished, sick, with scabies. I came back with it. I had scabies when I was a baby in France. And there is the other method where I think we make women who have children out of wedlock believe, of course, since many of us were born out of wedlock, so whatever we want, we don't necessarily have the details. I would later learn that my mother was given a bus ticket and a few rupees to go home. My biological mother never actually signed the adoption papers. They were signed by a judge, they were signed by my adoptive parents, but she never really gave her consent. She was unaware of my true destination and what would transpire. In fact, my adoptive parents made themselves even more known because they were in a clean and caring adoption process and everything was framed and it was very reassuring. My adoptive father was very procedural, so I'm lucky to have roughly the detail of the expenses that were made for my adoption. I finish the report and I go straight to the internet. I really look at everything that's around all this, and I realize that there's a convention at the AEC and that France has never ratified, that there are still 80 countries concerned with international adoption, almost as many concerned with illegal adoptions. This reassures me in all this, and I wait for the early morning to rise for the children to wake up, and I immediately talk to my partner about it. I can see in her eyes that she immediately understands. She understands right away that something is happening, really, that it has marked me. So then I call my mother, but I tell her, Mom, we need to remember this evening. I just watched the report. It's really bad. She's in disbelief, giving her shocked mom speech, saying, but Thomas, it's not possible. She hangs up, and I know that, I imagine we never really talked about it, but I imagine she had a complicated day. My mother watches the report at the end of the day. She calls me and she tells me, we need to see each other, we need to discuss it, we need to look at this file. So we look at my adoption file together. We discover the costs that were incurred for my adoption, which are quite significant for the time. We are in the 80s. Hotel nights do not cost 200 euros. Here we are almost on these rates. And there are a lot of legal fees, social worker fees, fees in France for an association. All added up, we still come to a significant sum for the time. That's 4,000 to 5,000 euros, not including plane tickets and additional costs. For Sri Lanka, it's a huge amount. Generally, my family is in a comfortable financial situation. The amounts wouldn't have been a hindrance at the time for me. They are small, but there have been larger ones. Families who had lists of gifts to bring back there on the spot. You know, they targeted families they had good relations with. They knew my father wasn't thrilled about it, and they didn't ask him. And Mrs. Pereira, on the other hand, clearly says in the report that she too had to feed her family. And whether it was children or something else, she had to earn her living. She tells this with complete impunity, since for her, firstly, it is statute barred. She knows she won't be bothered. That's why she agreed to meet the journalist. If there's no one getting rich off this, it's pointless. So inevitably, these are cases that are immediately extinguished. And in fact, I understand that I need to trace my origins very quickly. I retrieve my file, scan all the documents, and send them to the person managing InfoFraud Sri Lanka. And she tells me, I'm going to transfer your file to Andrew, who is in Sri Lanka, who is a Sri Lankan, and who will take care of finding your family based on your file, what we find in your file. So then I receive a WhatsApp message from Andrew, who introduces himself as a man really in his 50s, who I think was very closely involved with these adoptions, who is very religious, who is very practicing, and who needs to help us. He's my angel in disguise. He explains that my file has been falsified at several levels. The passport photo is not of a newborn, less than 15 days old, indicating that the picture is fake and not of you. Your biological mother, we see her in several slides from other families. So she's not your mother. Her birth date seems correct, her name seems correct, and you're lucky the postal address written in your file is correct. He says it's south of Colombo. I'm visiting in a few days and will report back. Actually, I'm starting to feel the need to go to Sri Lanka. It's starting to come, the summer passes, and Andrew calls me back. He tells me, well, listen, I went to this address. I met a woman who would be your biological mother, but who for the moment tells me that it's not her. She completely denies it. He tells me, don't worry, I know it's her. She's going to take some time. She's going to confess. I think no one in her family knows. And then I caught her with her sisters, her son. I tell her son. That means I have a little brother. He tells me, it's your half little brother since he's from another union. But don't worry, I'm working on all of this and I'll get back to you. Claire is working in her office and I tell her, but actually I want to go too. I need to get plane tickets soon. I can't wait any longer. It's been too long. No matter if she's my mother or not, but I need to go there. And Claire tells me, well, listen, I'm going to make a collection and we'll spread it and then we'll see. And then as soon as we have the money, you'll get plane tickets and then you go. It went super fast because our close friends and our family and everyone was ultra touched by this. I had enough to get a plane ticket and I still don't have the answer to know if it's my biological mother or not. Andrew gets a call from one of my uncles who tells him, listen, it's her mother. She did have a child. She hid it from us. We didn't know she's willing to do the DNA test. I do my DNA test. When I arrive on site, we still don't have the result. In fact, I take the plane without really knowing if it's my biological mother or not. But in fact, it doesn't matter at all because I need to know where I come from. The plane door opens. I've never been welcomed like that, even by a customs officer, actually. I've struggled all my life to cross borders. I've traveled a lot. I've missed planes. I've experienced unbelievable checks. Here, I arrive in a country where I'm welcomed with open arms and told, welcome home, you are a child of the country. This customs officer gives me faith in what will happen for the rest of my journey. He asks me why I'm here, and I tell him that I'm here to find my roots. And then I see it in his face that this 50-year-old man, he begins to understand that he has in front of him a child who maybe should have grown up with his own son or with his little brother. He leaves his customs office, takes me in his arms and wishes me a good journey. I feel more at home than ever before. Like never before, I've been nowhere, but really. And at the end of the hallway, there's Andrew welcoming me the same way with open arms as if I were his son. On the first 4 or 5 days of my trip, he gets the DNA test result that is 99.9% positive. She is my biological mother. I tell Andrew I don't want to wait 3 days. I plan to go there the next morning. He assured me he would handle and arrange everything. However, I nearly altered my flight to come back sooner because I was also on the reverse path where I was telling myself, in fact, I don't want to go there. I want to go there. I don't want to go there. The night was horrible. I think I was afraid of what I was going to find, not afraid of being rejected, but afraid of what I was going to find. So there it is, 9 o'clock in the morning. Andrew comes to pick me up. He takes me and he tells me, well, it's now. We are in his van, both of us, and there we find ourselves in a very small street. I feel that everyone is waiting for me. In fact, I feel that the whole neighborhood is aware and that everyone is waiting for me. There is only one look that matches mine. It's that of my biological mother, in fact. And she comes straight to me, and there I take her in my arms, and she cries and we cry. My half-little brother who joins us, who also cries a lot. There is her husband who also comes, who cries a lot, who is, I think, very moved by what is happening. And then gradually the pressure goes down, and so my aunts, my uncles, my cousins arrive, and I meet my family, in fact. I feel what is called the maternal bond, in fact. I feel something that I had never felt before. It's what ties you to life, in fact. It's the blood tie, it's the smell, it's the touch. I had all of that, but not the right ones to start my life. So I discover the smell of my mother at 35 years old, and I discover her hand in my hair, what a mom does to her son. I have cousins who speak English. So they immediately come to me and explain to me that they are my cousins and that we are the same age and that they are extremely happy that I am here and that they need to talk to me and explain what my mother told them about my life, well, about her life and about my story. In fact, since she tells me that these are things that nobody knew, even my aunts did not know, that she told very recently after Andrew's visit, in fact, to the she's going to really tell how it happened and that I was torn from her arms. I was 1 day old and that they gave her a bus ticket and a few rupees to go home. My mother, they tell her that they will take care of me and that anyway, I am not a child born in a marriage and that she can't keep me. My biological father was probably one of the lieutenants of Mrs. Pereira. Surely there to impregnate as many women as possible, to have babies, to give up for adoption. But being born from one, I think that's something I put aside and I don't really want to know what it's all about actually. I already know enough. My mother didn't talk about it at all. There is also a shame behind all this. Deep down, she must have been waiting for me to come back. I think one of the most beautiful sentences that was said to me there, it's her new husband who told me, "Thank you for coming. It's the first time I see my wife smile." I believe she was an extinguished woman. How can one live after losing a child without knowing their whereabouts? Besieged by questions and requests for photos of what am I doing? Where do I come from? How have I lived? And how come I never came before? And why? And my wife, my children. And that means we have nephews, nieces, grandchildren, cousins. For them, I become the cousin, the brother, the European nephew who has a life, but who at the same time has his roots here. For the first time in my life, I feel that it's me or what. It completed me, it changed life for my children, for my wife, for my mother, for my sister too, because it wasn't easy for her either. For a week, I go there almost every day. I visit Sri Lanka for 5 consecutive days, traveling around the country alone. During this trip, I have encounters that ultimately shape the course of my life. I do the first part of my trip with Andrew. He takes me to the sacred and important places of Sri Lanka. And I discovered a country like this for 15 days. The hardest part was leaving Sri Lanka because I felt that I was leaving something that I would not find again until I returned. I knew that my roots were in Sri Lanka and that my life was in France. The anger, it comes back when I start to come down and I am in Lyon and I have to go back into my routine, and I realized that in fact I am not alone. Cambodia, Vietnam, Korea, where we talk about 250,000 adoptions, Africa, where in fact the word adoption does not exist, but we make people sign papers who can neither read nor write and who will never see their children again. It's a disaster because I have children now and I have a lot of analogies and images that make me say that there are no rich Indians or rich Africans who come to France or the Netherlands and take a little white child and take them home and say, yippee, we have a child, and it doesn't exist, it's nonsense. So it's really something very white, very Caucasian. Adoption, this power to go and fetch children from the other end of the world, because human value is not the same, and we do not ask ourselves the question of uprooting a baby. What will he become later on? What will his life be like? What will his feelings be? We will have to, I say this child, but it's me, must learn to love those around him. We have no right to uproot a child. When it's a decision that has been made by adults for a child, we are equating this to child trafficking. Child trafficking, it's being recognized, and it's going to be recognized as a crime against humanity. Through a mutual friend, I meet Emma, one of the founders of RAIF, which is an association to defend French children from international adoption. And I'm attracted to the idea because she has nothing to sell. She's just there to advocate, convince politicians and institutions that we need help, guide adoptees towards the right institutions, towards the right people. And I think to myself, that's what I want to do. I also noticed that the quest for origin is becoming monetized. I think to myself, it's too much, it has to stop. Today we act to guide the adoptees towards the right structures for their search for origin. We also push for many laws to help us structure international adoption. I would like there to be a real institution created around adopted children, that we don't have to create lychee pots when we want to go back and search for our origins, that the files are accessible, and that we change this format of international adoption to national adoption, and that we stop uprooting children for any reason. Yes, I'm lucky to not have experienced 30 years of civil war, to have a great job, wife, children, and family. Everything is beautiful and rosy, but that wasn't my intended destiny. My destiny, my life, it should have been Sri Lanka, the civil war, maybe sleeping in the streets, maybe having to help my family at a very young age to work. But my life, it should have been that. It's a somewhat schizophrenic feeling in the end, because we have one life and we know the one we should have had. But if I had really had my life in Sri Lanka, I wouldn't have been able to know this one. In parallel with my association commitment, I still have very regular contact with my biological family, especially my little brother. He is incredibly touching because he often sends me messages in the middle of the night because of the time difference. He calls me from time to time. With my mother, because she just wants to watch me. So I put the phone down and I work. Usually it's often when I work, when I drive, and he is next to me, and then he tells nonsense in English after the next project is to go there as a family. Of course, it's their story too. And it's also for them that I did this primarily for me, but it also affects a lot of people around me. If the current Thomas was sitting next to the little Thomas from 30 years ago, in fact, I couldn't lie to him. I could only tell him, you're going to struggle, it's going to be complicated, but you will always be well surrounded. There will always be good people around you, and you will manage to sort out the bad ones. But hang in there because it's going to be hard.